Welcome everybody. Thank you for making time for us today. So I'm aware that when you guys got the invite for this Data Lab Series 2, it was entitled ETL 101, but actually ETL is just a small part of data engineering. And I thought na maganda sana kung ma-explain ko sa inyo, like kahit paano, like yung data engineering field at a high level, even just the very basics of it, not just the ETL part, but of course, yung ETL is part of it. So, dadaanan din naman natin later. So, yun. Thank you, Daph, for the introduction, but give me just a minute to introduce myself again. So, my name is Kat Guevara, and just as a 1-minute story, it's that I didn't start out as a data engineer. I do come from an engineering background, but right out of university, I started first as a research associate, and then I moved on to become a data analyst at a tech startup. And it was when I started to work with data on a daily basis that I was really super hands-on with it, that I became curious about the technology side of it, like the automation, questions like, how do I put my work into production? Because it really shouldn't stop at my local machine or the last presentation to my boss or to the client. So this is when I transitioned into data engineering. It's a different field. It requires a different set of skills. So yun. So complement siya sa ginagawa ng data analysts, ganyan, ng mga data scientists. So yun. So what is data engineering, or what do data engineers do? Okay. So what do data engineers do? Medyo 3 statements, but medyo madami. So medyo madami yung laman ng bawat statement. So pwede nating himayin isa-isa. So the first part is like design, build, and operationalize the data platform. The data platform, I'll tell you a bit more about the components of it in the next slide, but just I guess the 2 important parts of it are the design and build and the operationalize part. So first is designing and building. This has more to do with really planning and implementing your different data platform components, seeing the big picture. Like, this is the data infrastructure. These are the different components that we will put together, and this is how we will integrate them with each other. Kasali na rin dito yung decisions like other architecture technology decisions, like, do you want to do it on-premise? Meaning, magpa-procure tayo ng sarili nating servers, we will house it in our building, ganyan tayo yung magme-maintain. Or do we want to leverage cloud technologies, which usually use a pay-per-use model? So, but even if you say na, tara mag-cloud tayo, ganyan, dami kasing providers, you have Google, you have Amazon, you have Alibaba. And even so, even after choosing a specific provider, each of them really has like a list of easily 100 services or so. So kasali sa designing and building the data platform or the data infrastructure is understanding what specific services do we need, how do we use the services they provide, and how do we connect them together. So the build part naman is just really implementation, the actual development. Now, the next important aspect of this is the operationalizing it part. On the tech side of it, you could just think of it as putting it to production. Like, ayan na, go live na, tumatakbo na sila. Yan, the data is flowing, the integration is working. But for me, the operationalizing it part has more to do with the end use. But hindi na lang data engineers yung involved dito, hindi na lang data engineers yung nagtatrabaho for this part. Now, we involve our data visualization experts, our data scientists, our data analysts, your economists, your strategists, people who can make sense of the data, people who will use the data platform, look at the data, work with it more intimately, try to make sense of it. So ito na yung parang, yung data mo ba nagagamit na for periodic reporting and analytics? or even better, nagagamit na ba natin siya for forecasting, or as we try to advocate for, nagagamit na ba siya for decision making, for policy making. So yun. So medyo madami na yung medyo itong part na to, but I guess just like the overarching purpose of data engineering. Next, more related to like ETLs, is developing a data pipeline architecture for data requirements. So data pipeline, what is a data pipeline? Pipeline connects something flowing from A to B to C to D. Like, we have physical pipelines, we have like oil pipelines from petro countries like Russia to Europe and the rest of the world. Ganyan, these are physical pipelines. You literally have to build something for oil to flow. In data pipelines, we're dealing with data, which are digital assets. So we're creating virtual systems. There are a lot of processes involved in like, taking and transforming your data. And so the data pipeline architecture has more to do with how this data flows from A to B to C to D. And then in this architecture, kasali na rin yung rules, yung standards, yung typical approaches natin for dealing with the data. I guess one example of this is like, do we do a full load every time? Full load means like the entire data set we load every single time that we want to work with it. This works fine if you're dealing with a small amount of data lang naman. But as the data grows, we may consider loading things incrementally. Kung ano lang yung nag-change, kung ano lang yung bago, kung ano lang yung na-update, yun lang yung kukunin natin. So this is part of the like key data pipeline architecture decisions. And of course, we have to consider data requirements. What are the needs of data stakeholders? So I understand that many of you guys are from LGUs. Thank you for joining us today. So here we ask what data is needed. So we may consider, health data, socioeconomic data, education data, infrastructure data. And what are the characteristics of the data that we need? Also, part of the requirements is like how frequently is the data needed by end users. So most of the time, batch processes are sufficient. So okay lang monthly. Monthly ang natin tingnan yung data natin. Okay lang weekly lang, ganyan. Yung mga quarterly lang, ganyan for reporting, like sometimes financial reporting quarterly, ganyan. But so that's the more typical tawag natin ng batch processing. It's scheduled, we do it periodically, and we usually process the data of the period in question. So for monthly, let's do it, let's say on the last day of the month. So sakto, today is June 30th. So let's process our data for June. It may be there's a bit of latency, but just the same, it's a monthly process and there is a fixed period of the data na pinaprocess natin. There are also very specific requirements for real-time applications, but I have to say this is super duper expensive, not just in terms of effort to set up and maintain, but also in terms of computational costs. So real time as in as it happens, as in habang pumapasok yung data, you do something already, or more sophisticated systems act on it already at the end. There are very specific use cases para justified yung investment into real time. Siguro like an example is like Netflix, like as you browse around, as you click on something, they have real-time pipelines running in the background. The next thing you know, you already have like a recommendation based on what you clicked 5 seconds ago, something like that. So yeah, but for our purposes, I think that should be okay with batch. Importante, like we get started in automating these things. And then the third big thing of what do data engineers do is enable analytics. As I mentioned earlier, like the data engineering aspect is just dealing with the technology side of it. We are not in the business of insights generation. We leave that up to the analysts, to the experts, those who have domain knowledge. But we do provide the system for them to do their job. Para they could do analytics. And this is really, we hope that this is not just, analytics for analytics sake. It's really about answering a question, solving a problem. So there, next slide, finally. I mentioned data platform. Let's go through the components one at a time. This is another pretty big slide because we'll try to himay them one at a time. Pero please bear with me. Let's just talk about the important components. Okay. First up is data pipelines. So this one involves raw data from various sources and then transforming them for reporting and analytics and for all your use cases, your end uses of the data. So why do we need data pipelines? Because raw data is usually held by different offices, different departments, different people. They're stored in different formats, different places, different systems. There's very rarely a single source of truth. It's very rarely, I don't think I've ever seen it, na all your data is in one place without any investment in technology. We are lucky when we go to a place somewhere and then they kind of already have like an MIS system in place or meron na silang so like some investment in technology to bring data, to centralize data to some extent. Because naturally, how we work is medyo decentralized naman, di ba? Parang you're responsible for this department is responsible for that, this person holds this data. So ganon. So there really has to be an effort to bring data into a single place. And then if we're talking about end uses for analytics, like it usually involves these data pipelines. But after that, after the raw data collection, is we need to transform them. Dito na pumapasok yung business logic, yung domain knowledge. Next part is data storage. So where do you store your data and ano yung speed, ano yung durability, ano yung format ng pag-store natin itong data na to. Kasali rin dito yung policies. So retention. Do we keep all our data forever? Means forever growing data. Yung data set that we hold is forever growing. And as the data grows, then our cost of keeping that data also grows. Kasali rin dito yung backup strategy. Like what data needs to be backed up? How frequently do we need to back up this data? Very critical data sets, we probably have multiple backups. We have to back them up like frequently. But also, this includes like how do we restore from backup the funny, we don't want to run into funny situations where we think that we have a backup and then when it's time to use it, like, oh no, how do we restore it? So yeah, so kasali yan dito. And then the next point about data storage is life cycle management. Ito naman more of sa cloud. I encounter this a lot more in the cloud. I think it's also applicable in like on-premise systems. I'm just like not very familiar with them, but this has more to do with setting rules. Now, for example, your data is older than 1 year or 2 years, siguro hindi mo na masyadong titignan, hindi mo na sobrang titignan your raw data. So you could move it to a different type of storage that you would access less frequently. Kasi yung hot data is yung recent data, like what happened in the past year or so is probably what we want to take a closer look at and take action on. So yun, kasali pa rin yan sa data storage. Next is query engines. How do we query the data? What specific languages do we use to query the data? This is more of a concern for big data. So do we need a distributed approach na? Ganyan. Next, important especially for business users or for sa end users of the data are the analytical and visualization tools. Dito na pumapasok yung dashboards, yung notebook environments. So let's talk about dashboards a bit, because I think this is what many of us would be familiar with. So dashboards, BI tools, they show visualizations, reports. They allow users to interact with the data. Like it makes the data a lot more friendly, diba? Um, the fact that we can interact with the data in this dashboard environment is super helpful. So sobrang nauso yung interactive analytics, like interactive dashboards na click ka dito, ibahin mo yung slice and dice, ibahin mo yung filters. So I guess an example, like in the video, they talked about COVID, like giving ayuda, ganyan, but maybe something like topic, vaccination of children, let's say. So you as an analyst would talk to your LGU and say, mayor or the city council or something, analysis ko ng historical data natin is ganito, ganyan. We look at data for the past 3 months and the vaccination of our children, ganyan, is going well, no issues. And then what if someone challenges you? What if we look at a longer range? What if instead of just the last 3 months, we look at a longer range, like let's talk about 6 months or 12 months, consistent ba ang trend? And then you say, okay, with one click, like right there and there, you could do one click, you could interact with your graph, expand it to 6 months, expand it to the range that you want to question a bit more and see nag-hold ba yung trend, consistent ba. Let's say another question comes up that you want to slice and dice it a bit more. Parang let's look at it by area, let's look at it by barangay, ganyan. And then here you see na ay, okay, hindi pala consistent across like the whole LGU. May ibang areas pala that are lagging behind. Or what if medyo baguhin natin yung demographics, medyo palitan natin yung filters. Ay, okay, meron palang certain sectors na kailangan masuyurin, mas kailangan natin pay closer attention to, ganyan. Like we have to drive more info campaigns to them, to encourage them, ganyan, to educate them about this. So yun. So this is how like these, like, sorry kung medyo kung overly simplistic yung example, but in my opinion, this is how we could make the analytics more interactive. The parang you answer, parang nagbabatuhan kayo ng question na this is what I see. Okay, what if it's like this? Then let's see if our dashboard allows us to look at that data that way. Parang ganon. But caveat is that I'm not saying na this is not possible with a more traditional static reports. Kasi yung more traditional way, di ba, is parang prepare slides, paste natin dyan yung graph natin, paste natin yung visualization natin, ganyan. Kasi pwede naman. So I'm not saying that this sort of analysis is not possible in our more traditional methods. Kaya lang, like having this like visualization tool that you can really interact with enriches the discussion, because right then and there, especially if your dashboard is very well made, and if your data was well transformed to support these kind of like slice and dice and looking at different data points, it really enriches the experience. Kasi right there and then pwede na kayong mag-discuss, pwede na kayong maghimay ng data together. With static data, pwede pa rin naman, but you really have to be super prepared, that you have to imagine all the possibilities beforehand and prepare your slides. You probably need to come up with sobrang daming backup slides for the different combinations possible. But if it's more interactive, parang okay lang, sige, let's click around, see if we can find anything interesting. So yun. Okay. Sorry, that was medyo naparami tayo tungkol sa dashboards, but I think that this is something na we're really advocating for. I guess also because we will be talking about dashboards a bit more, and we will be building dashboards as we later on in this program. So yan. But another like visualization tool na medyo nauuso rin for people who are a bit more familiar with coding is like a notebook environment, because in this notebook environment, meron bang familiar with like notebook environments as an analytical tool? Okay, sorry. never mind. Right. So like, because if you have a notebook environment, you could like edit, run your code, embed visualization, generate markdowns, and you really just need a browser. Okay. Next important part of data engineering is like your tools for access control. So usually, ano to, like, may iba-ibang ways, but like usually we do role-based access control where different people have different access privileges, depends on criteria like your function, your role, your responsibilities, your level, kind of like maybe you're a manager, then you would have more privileged access, ganyan. Like if you're an analyst of a specific domain, then you'd have access to data specific to that. There is something called like a principle of least privilege, where users and systems should only have access the necessary privileges to do what they need to do to complete their tasks. Parang walang labis, walang kulang. Dapat hindi ka blocked from doing your task, pero you shouldn't have unnecessary access. Ganyan, nothing excessive. It's part of an infosec policy in information security, kasi parang if let's say ma-hack yung account mo, ganyan, medyo responsibility mo rin yon, di ba? Medyo parang nagiging it's a point of weakness for the entire organization if you don't have that policies in place, that people just have access to the data that they need to work with and not a whole lot more. Yan. Dito din pumapasok yung like legal and compliance, like rules on how the organization's data may be used. So if you have like if you're dealing with personally identifiable information, like how we deal with data privacy rules, so or data privacy regulation. So again, data engineering is more on the technology side of this. Actually, we don't come up with the processes or with the rules. We're really just more like providing tools and the systems for people to work with them para compliant pa rin tayo. And the last major data platform component is monitoring and alerting. The first part is a bit more technical kasi parang data infrastructure components, like the tools that we set up, kailangan ma-monitor natin na the dashboard is down, the dashboard is not loading, the database is down, the disk is full, ganyan. This is the more technical component of it. But I think yung maganda rin to pay attention to is the data quality monitoring. So just a few words about it is that, diba, when we're doing exploratory analysis, okay, someone can manually take a look and do data profiling. Actually, our analysts are doing this a lot with the data, like really iniisa-isa yung data samples. But when you're already familiar with it and you already know what the data is supposed to look like, we can automate the data quality checking. So for example, if you're already expecting more or less similar data profile, then we can expect that after some time when the data is already flowing, then our assumptions for like how this data is supposed to look like should hold. And if it doesn't, na parang naiba, then we take a look. But more or less, parang ganyan na dapat yon. So very basic example is we have a field called gender. We expect that the possible answers are male, female, or unspecified, diba? So later on, when we look at this data, when we plot distributions and whatnot, we would think na ito more or less yung dapat lalabas. But if you see funny texts later, like blah, 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 garble, like weird strings, then there's probably something wrong in the system, and that's a data quality issue. So yeah, so we also kind of set up some monitoring for this. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yun na yung last of the like super heavy slides. The rest should be less dense. And from here on, we'll just talk about like our data pipelines. So ito na yung sinend sa inyo na invite na ETL versus ELT. What is E? What is T? What is L? Okay. Right. So ito na yung focus natin just for the next like 15, 20 minutes or so. So what data pipelines, ETLs, ELTs. So as I mentioned earlier, in data pipelines, we automate our data processing steps from collection to cleaning to transforming, all the way to the reporting. No human involved ideally. Like dapat nasa very, very tail end na lang yung human involvement. And then what are the E's, the T's, and L's? So ETL and ELT it's the same E's, T's, and L's, just in a different order. So E is extract, which is to pull the raw data from source systems. So usually we would pull it like from a database, from an API. There are some tools or some technologies that push, like it's possible to push somewhere like to a queue, and then you take it from that queue, but still really the more traditional approach is to extract it from where the data is stored. Next is the T, the transform. This is the more interesting one, in my opinion, because dito na pumapasok yung domain knowledge, dito na pumapasok yung like expertise ng mga tao. So we converting data types to make them more business friendly, to make them more human friendly, because maybe sometimes how they are stored in the system is great for the system, but not the best for human consumption later. To clean the data, I guess that much like we're pretty familiar with. Like it's never going to be perfect, so we will always have to clean it somehow. Enrich the data is more to do with like injecting your like business knowledge. Na this is like more yung mga interpretations, but I guess like that has more to do with combining it with data from different sources. So for example, you see data from a particular source, like I just siloed, diba? Parang kung ano lang yung nandun, parang yun lang yung nakikita mo. But once you can combine it with data from other sources, then you have a bit more insight na parang this is how they all look together. Parang ito pala yung bigger picture. So yun, ito yung transform part. Yeah, so it's interesting in the sense that sobrang dami mong ibang knowledge na pwedeng i-inject and derive from here, like generate from this part. And then the load part is about delivering the data to the destination system. So the destination system is likely like a data warehouse. A data warehouse is like what your analysts would use for later for like reporting, for analytics, for forecasting, ganyan. We would want to save it there. Yeah. Sometimes this would involve like overwriting the data or appending new data sets, ganyan. So as I mentioned, like the target system is usually like a data warehouse, which is SQL based. So iba-ibang flavors, but more or less like SQL based kasi very structured na siya. And like hopefully it's something that people are like more familiar with. Ganyan. Marami pa rin iba-ibang flavors, yeah, but more or less like it's more tabular, it's more structured na at the destination. So yeah, so that's ETL, but could be baliktad, could be ELT. We'll talk about the difference. I think ito na. So this is the more traditional approach. So your source system is here, and then this is the extraction part, no? We take that out, and then immediately transform na natin. And then before we do the transformation, before loading at the destination. So this is the more traditional approach, but the transformation doesn't happen in the air. Huh? There is like a staging environment, like a temporary environment in the middle. Yes, pero ano lang yun, parang ultimately what you get at the destination is the result of your transformations here. So parang cleaned na yung data set. Yan, parang whatever. So there's an extraction part here, and then you do what you need to do before putting it in the destination. So this is the more traditional approach. This is the ELT. Extract first, load first, let's transform later. So the emergence of ELT was like, I guess it's a result of how like the data ecosystem or like the community grew in general. So, there was the emergence of big data. So the volume, the variety, the velocity of data, a lot of it really grew tremendously over the past decade or so. Tapos dumami din yung cloud technologies. There's an emergence of new tools, ganyan. So a lot of systems shifted their focus into delivering the data directly to the destination. So here, di ba, parang we extract, tas transform na natin immediately based on the business needs before putting it in the destination. Dito naman, medyo binaliktad natin. Parang kunin na natin yung data. So from the source system, data is delivered directly to the destination. No transformations in between. So yung focus nitong part na to, nitong specific arrow na to, is really just synchronizing your data from your source to your destination in raw form with very minimal transformations. And then once you have the raw data here, you can do the transformations later. So ito, ibang pipeline pa ulit to. Parang you have a pipeline to do the transformation and then yung output, iloload mo pa rin. So there. But the thing is, parang when you do your transformation, you're starting na here, like in this system, kasi na-load mo na dito earlier yung raw data. And then just when you transform, you can load it back and then dito na siya i-access ulit ng mga tao. Okay, we can compare just some comparisons, I guess. Kasi parang wala masyadong difference. Binaliktad lang natin yung isa ETL, tapos ginawa natin ELT. So ano yung implications? First, I guess most obvious is on data availability. So, di ba, dun sa more traditional approach, we need to define the data beforehand. What are the data requirements? Ano yung business logic? How do we want to transform this? How do we want to clean this? Tapos, yung output natin is like, whatever yung pinag-usapan. So let's say meron kang specific report, ito na yung makikita mo. It's very structured, it's tabular. But in the ELT approach, we load the data first. Raw data is loaded as well. And you could actually have support for all data types, for different data types. I guess like pretty extreme, hindi naman extreme, pero parang non-traditional example is if we're dealing with images. So for ELT, like load mo lahat ng image files, and then maybe you could come up with a pipeline to extract whatever features you need from those images, to transform that image so that you have something that's more consumable later on. So in the ETL, it's a bit more strict, na parang you have to define what you need first, and then it's like super structured na, and then tabular yung output. In the ELT, like you kind of have the raw data first, you still transform it, you still, in the end, get the structured data, the tabular data that you need, but then like nandun pa rin yung raw. Which brings me to my next point on flexibility. So in the more traditional approach, if you have any changes, so for example, you come up with a report, and then after a few iterations, you talk na, kailangan pala ng extra columns, kailangan pala natin ng extra variables na titignan, add tayo ng extra data. Then you have to go back to the process. You have to change the process. Then let's extract more data points to support that. Then let's update the transformation logic for that. In the ELT way, where you already have the raw data, then you have that flexibility already, that you could add the transformations more easily because the raw data is already there. I mean, just to say, may papalitan ka pa rin na transformation, but if your raw data is there, I assume it's easier for you to work with. Like, you don't have to go back to the source kasi na-ingest mo na eh. Another like implication of ELT is that new data sources can be added independently. Like, you have a new system, let's say you roll out a survey system, and then you just say, ingest na natin yung data kahit na baka a bit later pa siya kakailanganin i-transform. So yeah. Next implication is on data privacy and compliance. So I mentioned earlier that usually there are rules for how personally identifiable information should be dealt with. There are rules for regulations for how an organization's data may be used and analyzed. So in ETL, because we already have a transformation before the data is loaded, your sensitive data can be obfuscated in flight. Parang pagka-extract mo from the source, bago mo i-load sa destination, mag-mask ka na. Ganyan. Tanggalin mo na phone numbers, kung ayaw mo makita ng analysts yung phone numbers or what. because maybe they might not need it or they shouldn't see it. They shouldn't see your sensitive data. But in the ELT naman, the challenge here is that the sensitive data may be available at the destination in raw form, and you would need to handle the masking subsequently pa. So yeah, hindi naman sobrang strict. Like if the source system already like obfuscates the data, then that's great. Then it's a bit easier for you. Even in the ELT side, sometimes you could put like a very light transformation just so that you obfuscate the you mask the sensitive data before you load it. So yeah, but in any case, pwede yung data privacy and compliance as long as as long as the regulations are clear, it's clear like concretely how we should treat the data, then it's possible. Kaya naman natin i-treat dun sa different steps of the transformation. So there. Okay. So I talked about ETL, ELT. Let's say we'll adopt an ELT approach. What is parang para saan itong lahat na to? So this is our ELT pipeline, diba? Where we have the source systems. We are extracting, ingesting the data as raw into some destination. We are applying all our domain knowledge, all the business logic to transform it, to make it business friendly, to come up with different levels of like transformations and reports, and to make it consumable to our data users. Here, we load it back into this data warehouse, into the same infrastructure. And then, ito na, dito na pumapasok yung what we talked about earlier, na we have visualizations and analytics tools. So, let's say whatever report, okay, let's say from the start, we have a source system with raw data, ganyan, di ba? Dirty data, we reload it, we clean it, and then we clean it, we make it very human friendly. And then meron ng report na parang, okay, pwede nang gamitin itong report na to. So yung report na yan flows back here, and then we could design the dashboard on top of that. So yung what I was talking about earlier, na parang nagsaslice and dice ng data, nag-iiba ng filters, parang that you answer questions on the go as you look at the data. A lot of that ay depende pa din sa how well you prepared your data for the dashboard. It may be possible to connect your visualization directly to your source, but then like if your source has dirty data and you don't clean it beforehand, and then pwede siyang lumabas dun sa dashboard unless you clean it dun sa dashboard mismo, ganyan. But like if you're really dealing with a lot of data, different types, different sources, and you have to combine them, like it's good to put them through this whole pipeline para kung ano yung kailangan mo for your visualization, yun na lang yung i-expose mo, like papasok dito sa dashboard. Yeah. And then the dashboard is of course what's used by humans here, which brings me to my next point, that we would want all of this to be automated. So I guess like the main takeaway from all of this is like what we are really advocating for is to automate this whole process. So from the data collection, which like let's automate it. Let's keep all the data at the source reliably. Like if we collect the data from people, whatever data we collect from people, we put somewhere, and then keep that here reliably. And then let's automate that whole process to ingest that data, to transform that data. Even feeding it into a dashboard, we could potentially like automate. So for example, not potential, we could really actually automate. Could even schedule like periodic dashboard refresh. So itong lahat ng to, if we automate that whole thing, ang natitirang manual is this, the one that involves the people, the one that the brains are all here. Ito okay lang yan. It's a repetitive process. Like once your analyst firms up kung ano yung kailangang transformations ng data, all of that could be automated to feed it into a dashboard. And so the repetitive tasks, let's have the let's have the computers do them. Like this is automated, 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 automated. So your dashboard is refreshed periodically as you need it. And so the toil, the repetitive tasks are removed from humans. And then the humans here, the consumers here, focus their time and efforts on value adding activities, like on insights and crafting actions to respond to what you see in the data. And I would think that for the long term would be more like policies. So yeah, which isn't, by the way, which isn't to say na parang etong mga to, once you automate, wala nang trabaho yung engineer because I'm a data engineer, may trabaho pa rin naman ako. But like the focus of the data engineers here in this whole automated system is to keep that system running. And then everybody else, the consumers, the analysts, your data scientists, your strategists, whatever, they're really just in the business of consuming the data here, of getting insights from here. If there's anything that you don't see here, go back to your transformation. As long as your raw data is here, you could come up with something new at this point. If you have a new system, if you have a new source system here, load it here to make it readily available for people to consume here. And then feed to here. Parang ganun. Parang, let's say meron kang isang analyst dito, gagawa siya ng isang magandang dashboard. Yung dashboard na yun, malamang gagamitin ng 10, 20 other people. So, but can those 10, 20 people go here directly at the source and take the data from there? It may not be as efficient, depending kung gaano ka like kalinis or ka ganda yung integration between these two. Yeah, so I put a star in this slide because this is what I really feel like strongly about. This is actually what I do on a daily basis. And this is really what like we kind of advocate for. Na parang let's come up with a system where things are automated, where what we can remove the tasks, the repetitive tasks that we can remove from people, let's make the machines do them. Let's set them up so machines do them, and then people can remain creative and insightful and like, yeah. So there. So just a few advantages of like automating data pipelines would be the reliability. So for example, tatanggalin natin yung manual step na a person goes in and emails, a person logs into his computer at 9 a.m. every day to email you the data. The next day, ay medyo na-late siya ng 9:15, email niya at 9:15, parang ganun. Tinggalin natin yun. Toil din yun para dun sa tao. Eh. Kasi what if mag-absent siya? Or what if umalis siya? Then you need to teach someone else para mag-generate at mag-email sa'yo ng data. Ganun. And the next is timeliness, like you say goodbye to stale data if you could like automate it. Like for dashboards, diba, we would want our dashboards to have fresh data. If we're talking about monthly refreshes, that's fine. But like it's the most recent month that we are talking about. Parang para timely yung gagawin natin, yung decisions natin. Because parang if you have a dashboard that looks at December data, parang yan pa ba yung situation? Improve data quality as smarted because it's repetitive. It's really the same transformation. And so if anything is wrong, there's something wrong in the system. It's not like a human made a mistake on this day that he didn't make the previous day. Overall time savings, like what I already mentioned in the previous slide, na tatanggalin natin yung toil, tatanggalin natin yung repetitive tasks, and then focus dun sa part na parang more insights generation, na parang what, as an analyst, what should you really be focusing on, like deriving meaningful stuff, making sense of the data, and not the repetitive thing of extracting the data, loading the data. Yeah. Even the transformations, they may be super complicated transformations, but there are definitely ways to automate those transformations once you have firmed them up. Okay, so, okay, that's quite a lot already. So many of you may probably be wondering, parang ang complicated naman. Do I have to set up all of that? Gusto ko mag-dashboard. Gusto ko mag-collect ng data. Like, one use, like this KoBo that was talked about recently. Gusto ko rin mag-dashboard. Parang ang complicated naman. Nagsiset up ng sobrang ng system na ganun. Just to have some sort of dashboard. Is it always like that? The answer is no, not really. We can set up simple integrations. There are some limitations, more often than not, on the size of data that you could deal with in such integrations and on the scalability, because parang habang palaki ng palaki, parami na ng parami yung data, then siguro kailangan na natin mag-set up ng entire pipelines. But if it's more just like looking at a certain farm, looking at a certain part of the data collected, it's certainly possible to set up simple integrations. And that's the other thing that I wanted to share with you. So yeah, so Google Data Studio, it's nice, it's quite easy to use. I'm not a visualization expert. I actually consider myself terrible at visualizations. I can set them up, but I'm not very good at coming up with like ano yung magandang hindi lang itsura. I think it's more like how the visualization reflects the characteristics of the data. So this Google Data Studio is Google Cloud's free BI tool. Free, yay. So as of now, it's free. We don't know if they're going to ask us to use it in the future. Oh, okay. Sorry, before we move on. Are there any questions? Sorry, I was asked to ask for questions. Is there, okay. Yeah, any questions? Noonie. Okay, I'll wait a bit before demoing. No one. Okay. Do I still have you guys?
Kat,
Yo.
ako. This is
Yes.
Morning, thank you. Ano lang, with regard to yung una-una kong naabutan about data access, you know, a lot of us use Google links, and how is there a way to find out if the links are passed on to other people? I mean, yung traceability ba noong sino ang napagpasahan ng link?
If it's public, I think if it's a publicly available link, I'm not a.
Or even if it's a public link, you would know who accessed it.
I'm not aware of like how you would be. I think from the document, let's say a document is publicly available, like who exactly accessed it. I'm not aware of like an easy way to do that. There may be audit functions inside the Google workspaces that the Google workspace owner would have access to. Yan. Pero parang for you as like an end user, it's not as straightforward. So yung best practices usually are like very explicit sharing to specific people, or isa pang practice is like share within the organization, ganon. But even so, parang anyone with a link in the organization can view it or for comment on it. Ganyan. Yeah, I think in the workspace there may be audits, but I don't know how easy it is to extract that data for like a normal user. Ganyan. Baka yung admin ng mga workspaces kaya nila.
Yeah. My other question is, kasi for AER, it's really important for us to have access to the raw data. Kasi you mentioned na, sige, eto, pag ETL, and then they can actually already take out some of the information, so that sige, this is a very concrete time when we went to the Department of Agriculture. We wanted to get talagang raw data. But sabi namin, okay na kami na tanggalin nyo na lang rin, i-anonymize nyo, tanggalin nyo yung mga names kasi nga sa data privacy and all that. And yet, they speak, parang may hesitancy, and then they will say, sige, tell us exactly what you need na lang. And then they will do the transformations and just give us parang sila na mag-generate. But for ATR, we want to see if how they generated it is really correct, right? Diba? Yung, so, ang ano ko, pag meron bang way to, once, halimbawa, pag we concede na, bigay nyo na sa amin nga yung generated nyo, but can we go a step back after they generate it? And halimbawa, we do barangay level calculate yung parang barangay level data analysis na mas kahit household level, kasi for sure i-anonymize nila eh. Pero yun, ano ba, yung parang parang prutas pa, binigay sa'yo ng buo, pero gusto mo biakin pa ulit, tingnan mo ulit yung laman sa loob. Ganong type of ano. Gusto nila, bigay nila sa amin yung prutas na buo na yun.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's what we want to double check if what's really inside is really the fruit that we asked for.
Yes, I understand, ma'am. Yes, so usually it has it kasi kapag aggregated na parang you'd be a bit more confident to share it kasi you can only slice and dice to a certain extent, but then yun na nga parang gusto mo biyakin yung prutas. So how do you go a step back and look at the raw data? So usually po yung pwedeng gawin is yung raw data pwedeng i-share pero nandun na yung light transformations. Like, so let's say your raw data is individual level. Pwede pa rin naman i-share yung individual level. Pero you have to they have to identify and mask fields. Let's say name, tanggalin nila yung name or sometimes pwedeng i-hash, pwedeng parang medyo i-transform yung name. So instead na nakikita mo Kat Guevara, nakikita mo is a hashed version of Kat Guevara. Minsan it's like some random string. So any person who just looks at that string cannot say it's me, but then my data is available there. Parang ganun. Like my phone number could be hashed. So instead of +659 blah 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 blah, it's really just +65 XXXXXXX. So you know that this person is there in that area given this. Kasi nakikita mo na +65 pa rin siya, pero you cannot identify that it's me because that's parang you've removed my phone number, parang ganun. So yun po yung usual way na parang okay pa rin kunin niyo yung raw data at the raw granularity, pero yung sensitive fields yung tatanggalin kasi malamang yung sensitive fields hindi mo naman kailangan yung name for analysis, hindi mo naman kailangan yung phone number for analysis. Yeah.
Sige, thank you, Pat.
Okay po. Yes, any questions? I saw someone raise his hand earlier, but
yes,
I don't know.
AJ yung Kat.
Yes po. Yes, AJ.
Yeah, hello. Hi, Kat.
Yes,
Sorry, can I ask
hello.
a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so related kasi to sa experience ko on the data pipeline. So you mentioned earlier na it's good if everything is automated at the data source and then hindi na siya dumadaan sa tao. But yung experience ko kasi is, for example, we work with data na the government produces and then a lot of times they produce it in a PDF file, for example, or in a report, and an Excel file that they upload to a website that's not available through an API, for example. So parang in my experience, a lot of the work involves manually encoding the data and then parang ibang issue pa yung storing. So that's the first thing. How do you make it robust to that kind of constraint? And then the second thing is, naranasan ko din kasi before na we would work with local Excel files and then nagkakagulo kasi we would share it and then when somebody would update it, nag-iiba-iba. Eventually, natutunan namin yung Google Docs and Google Sheets na at least if you update it, parang everyone gets the latest update. But the problem there is, if you have a folder na nandun yung iba't ibang files, for example, with different headings or with different parang how do you maintain it properly? And then personally, parang I've been trying to maintain a database of economic data. So instead of working with Google Sheets, I've tried using GitHub. So parang when I update the data, at least may comments and nakikita ko kung kailan siya updated. And then yun yung feed ko into like a dashboard. So so I have no experience working with, for example, databases for SQL. So would you recommend, for example, na i-migrate doon or you think robust enough na ang Google cloud or Google Drive, for example, to store, hindi naman siya malaking data set. Do you think it's good enough for that purpose? So yun lang
Yeah.
for my question.
Yes. Okay. So for the first question, the agency you're working with is giving you data in a PDF or something. My answer might be a bit idealistic, but ideally we tap directly into their system. So if they give us some access, kasi parang yung PDF na yun malamang in-export lang din naman nila from somewhere. So the idealistic answer would probably be that we talk to them and say to give us specific access, that I don't know if they could audit it somehow, if they could give us access to certain schemas, certain tables, ganyan. They could even revoke the access if they think na parang they don't need it anymore. So yun, so parang they could give us very tight controls pero rekta tayo sa source, as opposed to working with an export that we again have to import into our systems. For dealing with I think GitHub should be okay actually. But do you keep them as CSVs or something on GitHub? I actually think that it's easier to mess with the data when it's on Google Sheets than on GitHub. You make a wrong press on the UI and the cell gets updated, whereas in GitHub, you'd have to probably make a pull request or something. So that's fine for smaller data sets. Yeah.
Sorry, last follow-up na lang siguro. What would you recommend then for cloud computing service? Because I'm not also familiar with how SQL is set up, for example. I'm not sure then if parang is it set up on a local computer or is it set up on a cloud platform? Parang how is it usually accessed? For example, how would I set it up, and then how would I allow people to work with the data that I would, for example, if I'm the one maintaining it, how would I allow people to also access the data?
Right. If you need to share it with other people, it's best to go on the cloud, because if you set it up locally, then it's difficult for people to get access to it. So on the cloud, madami, you could use Google, you could use Amazon, it could start a database, and then just give them the credentials, give them the connection details, and give them access to it, and then mas kaya na nilang i-access. Kasi kung local, kasi if it's local, you can run a data, let's say you can run a MySQL locally. The MySQL service runs on your computer, the data is stored on your computer. Paano pag patay yung computer mo? Hindi nila ma-access. But if it's on the cloud, as long as they have the correct connection details, and then you give them, you grant them access to it, then it should work, and less maintenance for you also.
Okay, thanks, Kat.
Okay. Yeah.
Kat?
Yes.
Siguro may isa lang question. Para sa mga LGU, para sa mga LGU daw na wala pang experience sa cloud, ano ma-recommend mo as a start? Anong cloud ang pinaka-ma-recommend mo? Ganon.
Ay! Biased ako sa Google Cloud because I'm very familiar with it. Also because it has pretty good integrations even with a Google Workspace. So yung mga Google SSO ganon, ang dali kasi i-tie together. But just the cloud services, they're super similar. So if you want to use a SQL service in Google, Amazon surely has the same, Alibaba would have the same, even Tencent Cloud would have the same. So yun, baka iba-iba lang yung terms, iba-iba lang yung pricing, ganyan, but more or less same yung services na ina-offer nila.
Ayun, salamat.
Yeah. Yung Google kasi, kapag Google yung email mo, ang daling
i-connect. Tama. Ayan. Baka may question pa tayo from our LGU partners. Wala na. Baka mamaya pa yung iba, Kat. Ayun.
Okay.
Salamat.
Okay. Yeah, din. Yeah, ito na si Okay, so I was talking about the integration. Do you guys see my screen? Is it okay? I'm not sure if I lost the screen share. No, I am screen sharing. Okay, game.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the data studio. Yeah, so the good thing, I was told that I don't have real experience in it, but that Google Data Studio is similar to like a Power BI experience. So parang kung may background kayo on Power BI, it's super easy to use Data Studio. It supports many data sources. And okay, but what I think many of you are interested in is if we can connect KoBo directly to the Data Studio. Because like if you have certain data sets in KoBo, then pwede ba natin na siyang i-view on Data Studio. Okay, let us take a look. Do you guys see you guys still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so so let's say I have logged in to KoBo. So I have logged in using Lawrence's account, but I still have logged in. And let's say there's this form that I want to connect. Okay, so the KoBo luckily exposes an API for us to do this. Oops, sorry. Mali. Right. Okay. So it's an API. So what we are interested in is the API v1 data, because this is what allows us to get the submission data. So if we go here, okay, there it shows you that this endpoint provides access to submitted data in JSON format. Okay, this part is important. It's for JSON because later when we import it into Google Data Studio, it's going to be in JSON. Okay, so when we get here, let's try to get it in JSON. Okay, medyo, right. What we are interested in is like the data engineering form, this one. So there is a URL associated with that form. So it's actually this one, this is 1120320, yeah, this one. And it returns us the data in JSON format. If I could show you my terminal, okay, but we're kind of running out of time. So, okay lang. Let's go to, so basically, yung KoBo exposes this API, and then using this URL, pwede na natin i-fetch yung KoBo data. So how to connect it to Data Studio? So this is Data Studio. Like, yeah.
Excuse me, may question
Yes.
lang. Ano daw ulit meaning ng API?
API is just like something like allows you to interact with like the program. So in this case, this specific API exposes data to you. So parang i-hit mo siya a certain way, parang ganun. Oops. Yeah. And then you get the data. Ganun. It's really just like a way to interact with certain program, like an interface to it. Yeah. Okay. So this is the Data Studio. Like as I said, like kasi Google is medyo it integrates well. Like my AER email, my AER account is a Google, so like I could use Data Studio with that. Yeah, and if you're familiar with like Google Sheets, Google Drive, even the UI is very similar. So yeah, you have these things on the side for creating, and you could check what's shared with you and what you own. So I've actually integrated it. So the good thing about Data Studio is like yung integrations madami. You need to first configure data sources to connect to. So let's say data sources, right? Okay, let's create a data source. I already have one, but like if we were to create a data source, you could see that madami kasing connectors. So like yung question earlier na parang okay bang mag-set up ng like SQL or like ng some database on the cloud? Pwede, okay, di ba? Kasi you could easily connect Data Studio to it, and then seamless yung integration between your data and your visualization tool. Like you can even connect Data Studio to Google Sheets. Yeah, but for us, Since our source or data is not in a Google service, yan. So pag Google ecosystem, sobrang convenient, but it's a very active community. They provide a lot of connectors to Data Studio. So yun. So the connector connects Data Studio to your underlying data. So in this case, we're looking for a connector to connect to KoBo, but there isn't like a KoBo specific connector. But we know that KoBo provides us the data in JSON. So we look for a JSON connector. How to choose a connector? First and foremost is that it has to be compatible with your current data source. A lot of it has to do with reputation. And that check mo na lang din na reasonable yung permissions. I wanted to try a certain I think I tried a certain connector, kaya lang parang masyadong aggressive yung permissions niya. Parang sabi niya, it's gonna get access to my drive and whatever. Like I wasn't very comfortable with that. Parang gusto ko, i-access niya is whatever I provided lang. So yun. Okay, so let us set up a connection. Okay. So there. I actually set up one na kanina. Never mind. Maybe I'll just go back to the source. I'll just show you the source. Sorry, we're running out of time, but it's okay. So let me just show you that I've actually set up one earlier. So I'm using this connector for connecting my data to JSON. So earlier, di ba, nakita natin na parang there is a URL that exposes our form data. So itong parang URL na to, yung gagamitin natin for connecting to KoBo. To Data Studio. Okay, so I've set up the query config. I just wanted to show you guys. Yeah. We wanted to collect your responses to the data engineering form, but we're running out of time. So I guess I'll just show you like one from a different form. So this is the data source, diba? Okay. So the important thing here is that KoBo exposes the data somehow through this URL. So on our side, in the Data Studio side, we will connect to that. So here, okay, so like this is my data source. And then I say that this is the same URL actually. And then your authorization is like your username, your password, or if you have like a specific token, ganyan. And then the specific query config, dito na siya papasok. So we connect to that data source. So basically it's the KC humanitarian response. And then the method is a get, because we're going to like fetch the data, diba? And the specific URL is ito na. So ito yung specific to the farm. So up to this part is quite common kasi yan yung in-expose niya, yung humanitarian response.info API v1. But what's specific to the farm is ito na yung v1.112.0320. Yeah. This is actually a different form that we are fetching, but that's okay. We save it. Yeah. And then, okay na. So we updated that's the source already. So how do we expose it on the dashboard? Okay, let's try to create a new one. Let's go back to Data Studio. Yeah. So we could start, let's say, a blank report. Yeah. And then my data sources. So I already set up the connection. Diba? So the first part I was doing was just setting up the connection to the data. Pero yung dashboard mo, yung report mo, you have to choose what data source, what connection you will need. Actually, what data source ito na. Kasi you set it up as a data source na. So let's say this. No? If you were to add this, and then I think it's going to warn me that the people who can use the report will have access to the data, like in that connection. No, please don't fail me. Okay. Yeah. Yung isang limitation pala ng direct connection is that you're kind of at the mercy of yung tool na yun. So like, right now we are at the mercy of KoBo kung gaano kabilis niyang ibibigay yung data sa atin, and also it's Google Studio that's like processing this data. Yeah, so there. So this is our form data. So let's say, okay, I will add a name chart, let's say, and then okay, so this is a different form. Sorry, I couldn't use the one now because we're kind of running out of time. But let's see, the dimension is this. So yeah, so ganyan lang siya. Tapos the metric, okay, let's wait for it to process. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so let's say it's like this, and then you could choose the metric type here. So we're not trying to take the sum of the ID, we're just trying to do a count of the ID. And then, yeah, so this is your visual. So this one is really like just a visualization of the data that is available in this URL, which corresponds to your farm here. So yan, I think yeah, so if you want to fetch it again, that's all right. If you create a different if you create a different like visualization that connects to the farm, that's also fine. It would just fetch it again. I think it would cache it, but I'm not quite sure of the data refresh. I think it's very 12 hours. Yeah, so there. I guess that's the end of my part. Daph, you wanted to ask them to answer a form?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, wala na bang questions so far from our participants? Meron pa kaya? Sorry, medyo nag-extend tayo ng konti. Sana wag nyo kaming iwan pa din because later, kung medyo naghabol tayo dito sa part ng integration ng KoBo, ng KoBo, tsaka nung Google Data Studio, medyo makikita natin yung further illustration ng pag nilink na yung ating post test doon sa Google Data Studio. Pero ngayon, wait lang. May question po from VSU. Hi, Ma'am Venice. Good morning.
Hello, good morning po. Miss Kat, tanong ko lang, in one report, can we integrate two or more sources of data?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
For example, one is from KoBo, tapos gumawa ka rin ng from Google Survey, Google Form. Kung pwede ba siya?
Okay. As in different.
Yes.
Right. I will have to check that. I believe it should be possible. But I will have to double check that. Yeah.
I'll turn over the time ulit sa'yo.
Okay. Yeah. I was just playing around with it while Daph was explaining. Yeah, but pretty much kanina kasi before we started, I was playing around with the data engineering, this particular farm, and there wasn't anything because, well, wala pa kayo responses. But now it looks like your answers are in and you can like kind of play around with them on the dashboard. I actually think that this one is slow. Like it wasn't like this the first time I tried it, but if you guys are gonna try like a Google survey, it should be faster and like it's easier to integrate. Kasi like you saw in Data Studio kanina, di ba? Parang the data sources, like they're a bit biased towards their text. So like if you have a Google Sheets is super powerful. Like if you have a Google Sheets, you can set up a Data Studio to Google Sheets directly. Or if you want to use a storage somewhere else or a SQL. So there, yun lang. Just the main takeaway for the Data Studio part is that you could integrate it with your data initially, but like as your data grows and as your needs become more and more complex, it's best practice to set up the pipelines so that you could just focus on the tail end of it. Kasi ito very simplified shortcut connection.
Maraming salamat, Kat. Salamat. Thank you so much for attending. Please look forward to another Data Lab series. Thank you po.
Salamat.
Thank you.
Bye.